afternoon, everybody. A little bit after 4 o'clock, 18th of July. Odds and ends day. Going to try to get the inside of the bonnet here painted. Do the couple touch-up spots over there on the body that I need to do. I also bought replacement capacitors for the big compressor. So even though these two here look pretty different in size, the nameplate data is the same. So hopefully that'll all work. And I'll try to get this thing wired back up. This thing's been working good, it's been keeping up, but the problem is that it's only got a 1/4 inch discharge line, so it's slow on the uptake, and I can't move as much as air as I would like, so that the painting's a little trickier. So I'm going to try to go over back to the big one and see if I can get that fixed. But otherwise, just kind of a random night a little bit. Gotta love it when a plan comes together. Well, it stopped running on me. Took it all back apart, cleaned it up again, checked stuff out and put it back together, and now it's charged it all the way up. So maybe the capacitors weren't the problem at all. I guess not, if it's going to run and then stop and do the same thing. But anyway, I'm going to live with it for now. Another little toy I bought myself just today actually is a little mini spray gun. It's a cheapo Harbor Freight one, just a touch-up gun. And the reason for this is because I want to get in underneath the wheel arches, up in there, and other spots that are really tight up underneath the dash if I have to paint that in color, and just general spots that are hard to get to with the full-size gun. So it's got this, it's got a cute little cup, came with a regulator which I'll probably never use, and then the gun itself obviously is quite a bit smaller, and we'll see how it works. I do have to clean it all up. These things are packed with like a resin, I don't know if you can really see that darker goldish color stuff in here. It's all nasty. But unlike the purple gun, this one actually comes apart a little bit. So I'm going to get this all cleaned up, mix up some epoxy primer just to kind of have it ready to go, and I will paint this evening. Here's a new problem. So what you're looking at right here is the bracket that's in the bonnet. Zoom back a little bit. And what that does is it holds the transverse link or transverse stub tube thing, whatever the hell that's called, and either because I just fit it so many times or for whatever reason, this forward nut here is becoming stripped, and the flats of this threaded piece are becoming so flat that I can move the bolt up and down, and it's causing it to strip threads, so it's not grabbing. So the back one's okay, but the forward one is not. Unfortunately, I don't see a way to get that out unless I take this bracket out. Maybe cut that off and try to weld a new bolt in there, but I'm afraid it wouldn't be straight if I did that. But of course, if I do this, then I've got probably a couple spot welds here, 1 or 2 in the middle here and 1 here. So those are going to have to get drilled out, and then I'm going to be re-welding and messing up stuff and all that. So I'm going to brainstorm this a little bit and see if I can come up with something that's not going to require welding. But frankly, I don't really see any luck with that. So let me think about this one. Well, this question is the better part of valor here. I think what I'm going to do is defer the question for my favorite form. And in the meantime, I'm just going to go ahead and paint anyway. Underside here, because at least, you know, all this other stuff is not going to be ruined just because I'm going to have to cut this thing out. So I'll brainstorm a little bit and see if I can come up with any other ideas. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and paint as planned so I don't waste the paint. And if I've got rework to do, I've got rework to do. But hopefully, maybe somebody can come up with a good idea, and that'll save me some time and headache. Got everything set up here. Got the body covered in a little bit of plastic there, just to protect the incidentals, especially the boot, which I hadn't covered. And then going to use the little gun first and get in all the nooks and crannies on the bonnet, and then switch over to the big gun and do all the stuff that's in here. I figure that might be the most effective way to use my time and everything. I don't really know how much paint I'm going to be putting in here, so we're going to kind of play this by ear, but we'll see how it goes. 2 wet coats everywhere. Happy with the way the bonnet came out. I definitely was not able to get all the spots that where the paint didn't get taken down to bare metal, so that's going to show, but so be it. But that little paint gun worked really well to get inside. I was able to go, hopefully you could have seen me, I was able to go inside the headlight area there and get that painted. So not too bad of a night, except for those bolts there. I got to figure that out next time. Well, whether or not my revisiting and taking it back apart and putting it back together was the trick or the new capacitors, I'll never know. But it worked. Cycled several times, so crossing my fingers that I'll stay that way. Ignorance is bliss. Alright, good morning everybody. It's Sunday, 21st July. Got these 2 studs here that I'm going to try to tap. Thankfully I waited and I asked the question on my favorite forum, and essentially the response was just to tap it down. The recommendation came from a guy that's a machinist by trade, and he said to go from a 1/4 28, which is what these are. And if you want to know what that 1/4 28 means, you can watch my fastener series, and go to a 6x1 millimeter tap, which will take this down a little bit obviously, but not so far, and it should be enough material left with the threads that it'll work, but not remove so much that it really compromises the strength of the union. So I've got a tap here of a 6x1 tap, big huge thing. So we'll see if this gives me enough room to work. I also have a little one that I picked up if worse comes to worse that I can always use. If nothing else, hopefully these will get me started. And then I'll go ahead and tap this guy out and see if this works for me. Little Marvel mystery oil to help it. Try to get it as straight as possible. Alright, definitely going to have to use the other tap that I bought, because I'm starting to smack into this stud here, but I'll go ahead and get them both started with that, since it'll be a little easier with the handle. I don't have a handle for the other one. I got this little guy right here. It's about a 1 inch, like a big 1 inch nut, and still a 6x1 millimeter die, of course. So I'm going to use that, use the big 1 inch wrench here, take care of it. As you do this, if you start to feel resistance, and even if you don't sometimes, I'm going to wind it back, just like trying to loosen up a stubborn bolt. Again, like I had mentioned in my fastener videos, once you start to feel it fight you a little bit, you want to wind back because you're cutting metal. You just want to try to clean that out a little bit. One of the things about these taps is, if you can see that, if it'll focus, how the end of it where it starts kind of is wider compared to this side where it's more closed. So that's obviously designed to help you start it, so you can start it kind of straight and gives you some wiggle room in there, but it doesn't allow you to run the tap and cut threads all the way down to the bottom. So I could turn this over here and do that. However, kind of lucky because you stack up 3 washers on this thing. We'll put it on there. Between the thickness of the post that's going to go on top and these 3 washers, where I've cut should be good enough. Now, unfortunately, what I'm seeing is that the threads are still in kind of bad shape right where it's going to get tight. I'll see if I can zoom in enough and show you. Alright, you can see where the threads are kind of fat at the top and then they really skinny up down there. That's where it's starting to flatten out. So this all might be for naught. I may not be able to use this use this little trick here to help me out, and I'm afraid that if I go any skinnier than this, 1, I don't have a tap for it, and 2, I'm going to start to really sacrifice the strength of this. So I'll do the other one real quick because that's on its way out anyway, and then we'll go from there. All right, so to give you an idea of how much material I'm losing by stripping down here, I'm doing it in millimeters because it's easier to kind of get a feel for that. About 5.93 millimeters or so is the width of the original stud with the threads, and the cut one is about 5.81 millimeters, so 1/10 of a millimeter or so, just enough hopefully to cut it adequately. So I'll go through, I'll cut the other one. I'm not going to show you that because you'll be bored, and then see if I can get this front one to tighten up here. Got the washer stack up here along with the nuts on there. They are now 10 millimeter nuts. As much blasphemy as it is to put a metric nut on an old British car here, and I'm still worried about this one stripping out anyway, so I'm going to try to tighten it down and see what happens. Alright, so it feels like it's allowing me to tighten it, so that's good. This is going to need to be one of those where it gets on there and gets set and I leave it alone. I'm going to put that center support tube in, and the problem with this is that when it goes into the wheel arches, it puts a lot of spring tension on it, so it's very easy to be in a bad spot on these threads and tear the threads out just with the holes here, and I think that probably contributed to some of what was going on. So I'm just going to try to do this a little bit differently, a little bit more carefully. I can't get enough of it in the shot to show you the whole thing, but essentially what I'm going to do is go really low with the end over here to your left, sneak it behind, that way I can get on the studs over here and then bring it down and pry it back, trying to keep it away here. If you can see that center hole there, the notch is really stripping or really hitting among those threads, and as this moves around it's going to knock some of those down. I really can't afford to do that, so as I'm tightening it and pulling this back to get the tube aligned in the center of those two holes, I'm going to be pushing forward on this and pulling back on that to try to get that aligned. Alright, so that seemed to work pretty well. I don't have a whole lot of tension on those threads, and also there is some adjustment here, so as I tighten these down I'm going to push this tube a little bit forward just to provide, one, a little bit more spring tension, and two, to get it away from those threads. Now that I've got that set, when I did my gaps, if you can remember that struggle, I had measured off the distance between this support here and the edge of the tube, and the same thing on the other side, and I got about 4/32 of an inch on this side and about 12/32 of an inch, and yes, I'm sure I can simplify that, but I'm not going to, over on the other side. So I want to try to repeat that, while also I'm going to snug up the 10 millimeter guys here just to provide a little bit of strength so that it doesn't slide into the threads, and try to keep the threads a little tight. Didn't really gronk down too hard on those, so now I'll line these threads up for the supports and get them hopefully lined up and ready to get sized. All tight. One thing I didn't consider over here is that I also had a lock washer and a flat washer, and that was going to raise that where the nut was going to be tightened down on, so I think I'm going to be good there. Definitely tight enough right now as far as I'm concerned. So thank you, Gary, from my favorite forum. He probably doesn't watch these videos, but that saved me a lot of time and a lot of hassle and a lot of headache, that's for sure. I also would like to probably maybe at some point today mix up a little bit more epoxy and just use that touch-up guy again and just get the backs of these bolts and everything. Alright, on to something else. One more thing I will point out here, and it might be a little tricky as I get to that point, but there's little rubber bumpers or whatever you want to call them, the spacers that kind of go in between the bar and the bonnet itself, just to prevent, you know, the bar really coming metal to metal contact, noise and or vibration and everything else. Obviously I can't put them in there when I'm going to paint. My intention with that is once this is all done, clear coat and everything, I should be able to, just by manhandling this a little bit and pushing down on the bonnet and lifting up on the tube, I should be able to get enough space in between there to slide the rubber in. At least that's what I'm hoping. Because if the plan works, I don't want to ever loosen these bolts really, ever again. Continuing down the path of odds and ends stuff. These here are the windscreen brackets that go inside the car. Door hinges here, bonnet hinge here. Want to get all this stuff in epoxy primer. I've got a shim here that I did when I was doing the gaps. So a lot of this stuff I'll throw in the blast cabinet. The hinges here for the bonnet I've already thrown in the blast cabinet. Unfortunately, you can't really take these things apart, so I'm going to have to paint them with the chrome piece on there, and that's so be it there. Just be careful with that. So I got the one door, and then I don't want to mix up my hinges and everything because I have them marked. So I'll do the other door after I'm done that. But the blast cabinet will help me get the paint off, obviously, and then mark it up or scuff it up pretty good. And then along with painting the rest of the stuff, I'm going to go ahead and get epoxy on all this as well. A lot of stuff going on in here. Got the Z fender hanging. Going to paint that in epoxy. All those other parts in epoxy, and then a couple of the nuts and bolts here that have been cleaned from this transverse tube. I'm going to get those in epoxy so that they get protected. And then after that, I don't really know what I'm going to do. It's about 11:30, and I'm kind of running out of things that I can hit, I think. Getting ready to spray all this stuff down. I've also decided these bolts that are in here had started getting rusty. They're all original, so they weren't galvanized or anything like that. So they started to rust up on me on the humidity and everything. So I've got two options here. I'm going to go with maybe both of them. One is to replace them completely with galvanized material, just get new nuts and bolts and all that kind of stuff so that I don't have to worry about it. Or two is to try to get epoxy primer on it. Now I need to redo the Raptor liner inside the wheel arches here, so I'm going to go ahead. I've scuffed up the areas. I'm going to go ahead and hit it with epoxy primer, just concentrating on those bolts and a couple of the spots that you can see that I had scratched up and everything when I was doing my gaps. My concern with this is, that I'm going to come through and the Raptor liner on the second round is not going to take very well, but we'll see how that goes. So that's what I'll try. If it doesn't seem to work or just becomes painful, then I'll one for one swap out bolts. I don't want to take them all out because I want those tubes to stay where they are. So I'll get one round of epoxy on everything in here and then wait 30 minutes and do the second. Round one of epoxy primer. I gobbed it on real good there. That was a mistake. But again, this the stuff is textured, so hopefully it'll work out okay. So I'll give this a 30-minute cure time. Come again with coat number 2. All right, round 2, here we go. Two wet coats on everything. That's going to be it for the day. All right, everybody, thanks so much for watching. Leave a comment below, tell me what you think. I'd like to thank My Favorite Forum and Gary specifically for giving me the hint on having to retype that stud in the bonnet so that I didn't have to cut that thing out. I also like to thank all of you. I'm fast approaching 1,500 subscribers, so that's pretty exciting. Another milestone, so I appreciate your patience and sticking with me, especially through this stuff that's not very exciting. So, hope you have a good rest of your day. Cheers.